Right. So we are going to talk about New York City being defeated by buses. Have you ever heard the city being defeated by buses?
No, I haven't. This is a first. Being completely defeated by buses sounds intriguing, so I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, so we have, Godzilla versus Kong, Mega Shark versus Giant
Awesome.
Octopus, and here we have New York City versus Republican buses.
Cool.
Republican buses won. Now, when it comes to illegal migration, you could say that the southern border of US is something like the Mediterranean in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
This is the main area of migration flows. So, for instance, in the US, from Mexico and other countries in, let's say, Latin America
Sure.
or a different one, they enter through the southern border.
Mm-hmm.
And in Europe, we mostly have areas through the Mediterranean. We have Gibraltar, we have Lampedusa in Italy, we have Greece and the Greek Isles,
Mm-hmm.
and also we have the road from Bulgaria to Europe, to the rest of Europe. Now, for some time now, there has been a U.S. southern border crisis, and the Democrats, or supporters of the Democrat Party, I should say, they have denied that there was such a crisis.
Of course.
For them, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But now we will talk about Democrats ranting against other Democrats as well, not just against other people who oppose these policies. They are starting having something like civil strife or internal conflict among their ranks.
Yeah.
And it is really interesting, and it shows the nature of the left as being basically structured against around the effort and the ability to blame game, to engage in blame game. Everyone blames everyone else. They never assume responsibility. I would say that this is almost metaphysical. This is how they view things to the core. It's never an individual's responsibility for their own actions or their policies. It's always someone else's, or an institution, another person, a structure. It's never their own responsibility. So up till now, people who have talked about there being a U.S. southern border crisis have either been ignored or labeled as, extremists.
Of course.
But now, as we said, we have supporters of the Democrat Party realizing that there is a problem with numbers. Now, before we begin, if you would like to support us, you could visit lotuscedas.com, our website, and consider subscribing. You could subscribe for as little as £5 a month and gain access to all our premium content. And you could watch videos such as Symposium 37. It's the discussion Bo, Carl, and I did on Machiavelli's Discourses on Livy Part 2. And we are talking about more about Machiavelli's greatest hits. You see him here dressed like a bat out of hell, singing songs like I would do anything for Firenze, and I would definitely do that. Bella Italia. And also, might as well face it, you're addicted to plots. Now, let's go here and see what happens. And talk about problems with buses. Now, this is an article from Daily Mail, and it says, tensions flare over migrants in New York City. Staten Island protesters are arrested while trying to stop buses carrying asylum seekers to shelter as they yell, take them back. Footage from the scene shows protesters banging on the bus windows as they try to prevent the migrants from entering the shelter in Midland Beach. And let us just give you an idea of numbers. It says, over 110,000 asylum seekers have arrived since the spring of 2022, with over currently 10,000 arriving every month. Wow. And we can scroll here a bit down. It shows some of the footage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was general.
That's insane.
AM. We have several trending weird articles there. I see something about Virginia candidate support collapses after live online sex sessions. It's the most viewed category. Yeah. Okay. Right. So what happened here is that basically Democrats have started understanding that numbers pose a problem.
Of course.
Because if you remember, the Democrat Party has been, let's say, in favor of
open
migration and open borders. They have very much hinted that anyone who would suggest otherwise is an extremist and someone who does not have a place in their society. But it is interesting to see that right now, when they come across and when they encounter the consequences of their own policies, they don't like it.
Mm.
How does this seem to you?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's an interesting development because, like you mentioned, Democrats are usually for open border policy. So to see Democrats within their own party having that sort of tug of war with this subject, I think is a good thing because it shows that actually there are some sane people within the Democrat Party that actually want to address the issue, albeit it's taken them this long to realize. And of course, it happens in a Democrat city. So if it would have been in a Republican state, we probably would have seen a different answer. But because New York, being a very, very liberal state, we're going to, of course, see the conversation open up a little bit more on the Democrat side. But that's just my view of it all.
I think that to a very large extent, they are trying to give a different interpretation of the situation, because it's not like they started saying suddenly there's a problem with numbers,
Sure.
therefore Republicans were correct.
Yeah.
They blame the federal government for not giving a response to that,
Yes.
because they're saying that these, let's say, issues need a response from the federal government, and
Sure.
the federal government does not give such a response. But they would not suddenly turn and claim that, well, we need closed borders now. They would argue for something different. I think that they would argue for a different distribution of the migrant influx across the states.
I've seen as well the blame being shifted to sanctions. I believe AOC, I think, spoke about that briefly.
She did, yes.
And said that we should look to, I believe, lift sanctions. I'm not sure if that's 100% correct, but she says if we just stop sanctioning Mexico, for example, or Southern America, Venezuela and other places, then we wouldn't have this issue. And it's like, it's not as easy as that, but...
Where every socialist country like Venezuela, for instance, or a country that has a centrally planned economy, it's always one step away from utopia for people like AOC. And the whole reason why the utopia has not materialized is to be traced outside that country. It's always something external, because God forbid, who could ever say that socialism
my
wouldn't
policy
work?
that made this happen. Yeah,
yes.
It's something else.
I am willing to consider that there are people who are, let's say, between the swing voters, who are in the swing voter category, who will wake up to it. I am not positive on that when it comes to the leadership of the Democrat Party, but yeah, I mean, of course. So let's see here. Colin Ragg says, just in, New York City is gearing up to pay over $1 billion on just hotels over the next 3 years to house illegal migrants. Good. That's what happens when you call yourself a sanctuary city. But that's just the hotel costs. New York City Mayor Eric Adams estimates that the total cost of the migrant crisis will be about $12 billion over the next 3 years. We're past our breaking point, he said. With more than 57,300 individuals currently in our care on an average night, it amounts to $9.8 million a day, almost $300 million a month, and nearly $3.6 billion a year. Residents in New York City have had enough. In the video below Staten Island, locals were arrested for blocking migrant buses. So this is terrifying numbers.
Hugely terrifying. And, you know, you compare it with our situation here in the UK. I mean, it's a pond to an ocean, really, if you compare the situations. But the situations is the same issue, which is, well, I mean, it's unsurprising, put it that way. Our overlords seem to be, well, for me, I don't know what your take is on this, but for me, it seems to be almost by design at this point, and it's just being allowed to happen. But at least there is a conversation opening up.
I think there is one, and it is allowed to continue for several reasons, but I would say most of all is cheap labor.
Sure.
I think
labor
this is
and
the
votes.
main reason.
Yeah.
Yes, and this is a bit frightening, because think of not wanting this, of being against it for several reasons. And also, you cannot just say that numbers don't count.
Of course.
I mean, suddenly, if let's say if 10 billion people, that's of course hypothetical.
Sure.
Just try to make their living in Lampedusa. Lampedusa would be stifled. It would not happen. So numbers definitely count.
Of course.
Okay?
Yeah.
And it's good to exaggerate sometimes when we're trying to get across to people who may consider themselves in the swing voter category, and they are constantly fed up with the idea that anyone who would suggest otherwise is someone who should not be, who has forfeited their rights to live, to breathe, or whatever. This is total nonsense, and we should resist it, I think. Now, but imagine this: that suddenly there is a necessity, or a perceived necessity. It is communicated as a necessity to pay billions of dollars. Let's say 10 billion, 11 or 12. Let's say 10 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Where is this money going to come from, and who is going to pay? It is either going to come from a direct tax or from an indirect tax. Again, printing more money by the Fed.
That's why a lot of people, including myself, are really starting to see that it could potentially be by design, and that it's just being orchestrated and it's just being allowed to happen. So it's understandable.
And let's see the next clip, please. Yes, we have here. This is Eric Adams, mayor of New York City. Let's hear him.
We turned this city around in 20 months. And then what happened? Started with a madman down in Texas, decided he wanted to bus people up to New York City. 110,000 migrants. We have to feed, clothe, house, educate the children, wash their laundry sheets, give them everything they need, health care. And this team here, we stated, let's do everything possible before we have to push it out into neighborhoods and communities. Month after month, I stood up and I said, this is going to come to a neighborhood near you. Well, we're here. We're here. We're getting no support on this national crisis, and we're receiving no support. And let me tell you something, New Yorkers. Never in my life have I had a problem that I did not see an ending to. I don't see an ending to this. I don't see an ending to this. This issue will destroy New York City. Destroy New York City.
Interesting.
We're getting 10,000 migrants a month. One time we were just getting Venezuela. Now we're getting Ecuador. Now we're getting Russian speaking coming through Mexico. Now we're getting Western Africa. Now we're getting people from all over the globe have made their minds up that they're going to come through the southern part of the border and come into New York City. And everyone is saying it's New York City's problem. Every community in this city is going to be impacted. We had a $12 billion deficit that we're going to have to cut. Every service in this city is going to be impacted.
Woe is me is all I got from that, really.
Yeah. This is a Democrat mayor.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but this is fun because, and it is interesting. I mean, of course, it's not fun because it's a major problem.
Sure.
But what I want to say is it shows some hypocrisy, I would say.
Of course, because the Democrats have been pushing open border policies for so long, and then as soon as it comes to their back door, suddenly it's going to destroy our city. It's like,
Yes.
a lot of Republicans and a lot of people on the right have been saying this for years, but you call them extremists and conspiracy theorists. So
And I would say that this is a mess. And
complete mess.
last time I checked, the governor of Texas is a Republican governor, and he's not in favor of an open border.
Abbott's, I think his name.
It's interesting that he's talking about the madman down from Texas sending red Republican buses flooding New York City. But why should the Republican governor allow his city to be destroyed by policies that he is not in favor of and Texans are not in favor of? So that Eric Adams can virtue signal without suffering the consequences of his policies. Now he suffers the consequences of his policies, and he's blaming the Texas governor.
Well, what's funny is I thought they were pro redistribution. So there you go.
Yeah.
Smell the coffee.
Yeah. So I would just say that what is interesting here is that he recognizes that there is an issue with numbers. These numbers are created by the policies that he has been in favor of.
Yeah.
But when he encounters the consequences of the policies that he has been advocating, he just blames someone else,
Of course.
who was against these policies.
But that's a classic politician move, though, right?
Yeah.
You should never, because as a politician, to be seen as weak or incompetent is like the worst thing you can do for a PR or whatever. So to have, so for him, if he was to turn around and say, "Yeah, well, to be fair, our entire party is very pro open borders, so it's kind of what happens," but he's obviously not going to come out and say that, so they have to shift the blame anyway. So it's just classic political talk. It's just
Yes,
classic.
but it's also blame game, but it happens on so many levels now, because I think that it is endemic in left-wing politics due to the aversion that leftists have in general when it comes to the concept of personal responsibility. And I mean, he has been personally responsible for advocating such policies.
Of course.
When he encounters the consequences of these policies, he blames other people. Well, I find this weird, but there is a blaming game that occurs in so many levels. So, for instance, we can check here, for instance, this by AOC. She's talking about sanctions against Venezuela.
Yeah.
And she's talking about the southern border. And she is basically saying that they have been authored by Marco Rubio, and that shortly after those sanctions were enacted, we started seeing dramatic increases.
Oh, another blame game, blaming another politician.
And she also quotes herself. She tweets her tweet. She says, "To actually address the asylum crisis, we must start with a U.S. foreign policy and global dynamics creating it. The broad Trump-Rubio sanctions have played a major role in driving millions of people out of Venezuela. Serious discussions about asylum seekers should address this."
So it's Trump and Rubio's fault that so many people are flooding into the US. Interesting.
And
okay.
You were remarkably prescient before, because you talked about AOC and how she was talking about Venezuela, and we have her here. It's obviously Venezuela is a socialist country. Okay, it's correct by default in her mind.
I thought it was a lovely place for socialism. Yeah, I love socialism.
And the only reason for exiting socialist countries throughout the history of the 20th century and the 21st has been external sanctions. It's nothing internal that could possibly
possibly
make people exit.
Couldn't be to do with socialism or anything of the like.
Yeah. So AOC is blaming US foreign policy. Eric Adams is blaming the federal government. The federal government does nothing in crises that require a federal response. And what the federal government does is basically to accuse every person who would suggest and even hint that there could be such a crisis. Now, let's watch the next clip, please, the next video.
I think it's something to watch here, how New York handles this, how the federal government handles what New York is doing, whether or not they take leadership, and how the sentiment on migrants might be changing even among some progressives or people who maybe previously were sympathetic or apathetic toward migrants, how bringing this number of migrants into American cities might change the way some people view what's happening at the border.
Which takes me to my next question.
Can I just comment on one thing about this really quickly? I've seen real horrors in my life. I fought in the Battle of Fallujah. I was in the Iraq War. Every single day, I could not be prouder of the work that the city has been doing over the past year. It is absolutely remarkable. Housing now, currently, 60,000 people, 20% of them children. That's more people than you could fit in Yankee Stadium. That's more kids than you could fit in Madison Square Garden. This is a lot of people that we're caring for every single day. And in emergency management, I just want to make this one point. In emergency management 101, when the local jurisdiction is no longer able to handle an emergency, you're supposed to be able to turn to the state and the federal government for help. That's written into federal law with the Stafford Act and into, you can see the history of emergencies and the way that this is the way it's supposed to respond. We have been turning around now for over a year, looking for help from the state, looking for help from the federal government, and they're just not there. And there's a lot of finger pointing. There's a lot of blame, as Julia just said. But what we really need is partnership. We need solutions, and we need real leadership coming from Washington.
again, this is someone who supports the Democrat Party. But there are two interesting things here, or many. Let me just ask you first, what did you find interesting?
I found interesting. I'm always dubious of anyone who says we must look to the state, or we must look to the Federal Reserve, or we must look to the government for solutions and help. I'm always dubious of that, because my views on the government may be pretty clear that I want less, and I want them to stop putting their finger in so many pies, right? So it's interesting hearing that. I also think it's interesting, like we've been touching on throughout this segment, that Democrats are starting to actually have this conversation. That is interesting in of itself. But once again, you're almost too late. You're too late. The policy is done. You've been drumming this. You've been drumming the drum of open border policy for so long now, and now that it's coming back to hurt the city that you love, or hurt the city that you represent, or whatever, it's now almost like best we do actually tackle this situation now. It's never future thinking. It's always find the solution in the moment. It's never, well, what could happen? It's always, it's happening now. We'll deal with it now. You know?
Yes, they never try to anticipate problems.
There's no anticipation.
But exactly. What is interesting is that, first of all, the other lady is pointing out that there are swing voters for whom this is an issue.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen one. It is a bit funny video. There's a black community in Chicago who voted 97% for the Democrats. Mm-hmm. And their neighborhood was essentially a host neighborhood for illegal migrants. And they went out and they constantly started saying, our community is being destroyed. We have lived here for so many generations.
Oh.
So, I mean, of course, there is a ton of hypocrisy there.
Of course.
But it is an issue for them. Mm. So the issue is that when people actually encounter the effects of such policies that they may want to support for virtue signaling or for whatever other reasons, they actually do not like it.
No. And
they start complaining.
I'll tell you something. This is going to sound quite incendiary, personally, and it sounds unfair for me to say. But in order for Democrats and the left, if we're going to use these paradigms, in order for them to wake up to bad policy, you almost have to make sure that they feel the authoritative boot in that respect. For example, free speech. Take that as an example. Take this for an example. For them to understand that free speech is for all, not just for certain people, and people are being arrested for silly things, for people being arrested for protesting, like mass migration. As soon as it starts happening to them, that's when they start to realize, okay, we must actually deal with this problem. So it sounds horrible. I don't want it to happen to anyone on the left or on the right. But when you have a case of bad policy, a taste of their own medicine is the only way really for them to really smell the coffee and wake up and realize, actually, we've made a mistake. So I'm actually glad that they're having this conversation, because it's a conversation that has fallen on deaf ears for such a long time. So to finally see Democrats actually talking about it is actually really refreshing.
What is interesting here is that he said that they have been raising this, but the federal government does not listen to them for years.
Interesting.
That's one thing. But I don't know if you're way too optimistic on what you're saying. Now, generally speaking, I am one of the office's optimists.
Yeah.
But I don't know exactly how they are going to integrate this issue in their own thinking, how they are going to start thinking about immigration, because we have the next clip from this discussion.
Here's also, though, the dangerous line that I want to talk about, because Julia was just talking about sentiment from a lot of people who are sympathetic to migrants, or maybe were apathetic in the past. We're at a place where so many of these people want to work, want to pay taxes, that if they don't get processed, well, we end up seeing a lot of these folks in the underground economy, which would be terrible for everyone.
So you're already seeing it. So a lot of people are currently working the informal economy. And I will tell you, having spent a lot of time with the people in our care, all of them, number one thing they want to do is work. They all have a,
and we have
loved
jobs.
one, and we have jobs. We have 10,000 homemade jobs in this state alone. We have 30,000 hospitality jobs, 5,000 agricultural jobs upstate. There's a lot of jobs that could be filled in New York State alone, let alone across the country. But the folks that I spend time with in our care, all of them have loved ones back home. It could be an aging parent. It could be a special needs child that they want to support. And they will do anything they can to support those folks. And so it is critically important that not only for them, but for ourselves, that we make these investments, get them to work, and do the right thing by the people in our care.
It will be good for our economy. It will be good for society. It will be good for culture. What we need to do is find a comprehensive solution.
Oh, gosh. Do you want me to? All right. Okay. So, bit ambiguous to think that every single migrant will want to pay tax and want to work. I mean, for a start, let's just be realistic. That's not the case. That's just not the case. I'm sorry. It's just utopian thought. I hate it.
I think that this is one of the manifestations of the rhetoric that ends with AOC's point, with Alessandra Ocasio-Cortez, where she says basically something like, all those who will engage in criminal activity will do so because their applications are not already processed.
Yeah.
So again, this is an extra level of blame game where it's like saying, if you are, let's say in the US, and you're against open borders, AOC is telling you that any kind of criminal activity that illegal immigrants may enter into, it is your fault. And I will say that this is blackmailing. And also we should bear in mind that Trump's Title 42 has been repealed, which was an article that allowed for fast deportation during the COVID years. And I think that this changes the picture completely, because they are presenting the issue in such a manner that does suggest that numbers are a problem, but the solution is not to start talking about safeguarding community. The solution has to be with a distribution of the illegal immigrant population across the state. Yeah. And I would like to end with one thing here, because it seems to me that it is important to try to talk to people who may not even consider who may not agree with, for instance, hardline border policies, that there are two distinct arguments. One is to say that people who want closed borders are not monsters. Okay, obviously. Okay, but some people don't see it.
No.
And the other is that you should want closed borders. Now, those who are in the swing voter category, and how should I put it? They haven't made up their minds yet. And sometimes they may not know what to think. I think they should think of it this way. Let us try to say that wanting closed borders is not monstrous. And I was thinking it this way because I'm trying to communicate this point across to other people, because every Western country faces this issue. And for instance, Greece faces this as well. Oh, yeah. Just like the UK and the US and France and Spain. So think of you and your family being in a block of flats, and someone knocks on the door and gives you a very sad story, which may be true, and tells you, please let me spend the night and stay with you here. What I want to say is that it is human to not want to open. Why? Because maybe you're afraid of your children. Now, let's see the world as an extended block of flats, and each block of flat as a country. That is what I want to say, that it is human to not want to open the door. Even if the other person has a difficult story, it may be true or not. There is such a thing, and there is such a place for saying that I need to care for my own, and sometimes I don't want to take some risks.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, a great litmus test as well. Ask someone, how many illegal aliens are there in the UK or in the US? And if they get upset by the use of the language, or they turn around and say, well, there's none, don't waste your time.
So that's with the first segment. I was thinking that it shows brilliantly the nature of left-wing politics. It's all centered on blame games.
Yeah.
The main population is targeted and blamed for everything, like, things like the extinction of the dinosaurs and stuff like that. So it's good to show how this manifests in action.
If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, why not visit our website, where you can get the podcast live, in full, uncensored, and for free from 1 o'clock UK time every weekday. And while you're there, for as little as £5 a month, you can access all of our premium content, such as our new series, Lads Hour, where 5 of us, guests included, sit around a table and discuss hard-hitting topics like what animal we could fight this week. And for more silliness from the rest of our hosts, you can follow Harry over at Harry Lotus Eater on Twitter, and all of us over at LotusEaters_com. Until next time, goodbye.